The first time Amelia saw the photos, her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her phone. There he was, Daniel, on a white sand beach in Santorini, his arm wrapped around a woman in a red bikini. His smile was the same one he used to give her, the same one he'd given her when they stood barefoot on their wedding day, whispering promises that now felt like lies. She was 7 months pregnant with his child, and he was drinking champagne under the sun with someone else. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She just closed the app, stood up, and wheeled her small suitcase toward Gate 12, where her one-way ticket to Paris was already boarding. Waiting for her there was the man whose life was nothing like hers, and whose name she had never expected to say without fear. The first time Amelia saw the photos, her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her phone. There he was, Daniel, on a white sand beach in Santorini, his arm wrapped around a woman in a red bikini. His smile was the same one he used to give her, the same one he'd given her when they stood barefoot on their wedding day, whispering promises that now felt like lies. She was 7 months pregnant with his child, and he was drinking champagne under the sun with someone else. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She just closed the app, stood up, and wheeled her small suitcase toward Gate 12, where her one-way ticket to Paris was already boarding. Waiting for her there was the man whose life was nothing like hers, and whose name she had never expected to say without fear. Amelia Hart had always been careful about appearances. Even now, she moved through Heathrow's crowded terminal with her chin high, hiding the exhaustion that clung to her bones. Her beige wool coat was buttoned over the gentle curve of her stomach, her hair tied back neatly. From the outside, she might have looked like any other well-put-together woman catching a flight. Inside, she felt like her life was splintering, and she was quietly gathering the shards before anyone could see the mess. London had been suffocating since the split. Every corner seemed to hold a memory she didn't want. The bakery on Charlotte Street where Daniel used to bring her croissants after night shifts. The park bench where they'd picked baby names before everything fell apart. Even her flat felt heavy, full of unopened boxes and unused baby clothes. That's why she'd said yes when Adrian Blackwell called. Adrian was the kind of man who filled a room without speaking. Billionaire CEO of Blackwell International, his name was attached to hotels, private islands, and business headlines. He was also, improbably, a man Amelia had known since childhood. Not well, not closely, but enough to remember the way he'd always treated her like she mattered, even when they moved in different worlds. They'd reconnected a month ago by accident or fate, depending on how you looked at it. She'd been sitting in a quiet cafe in Kensington, trying to eat a scone she couldn't taste, when a deep voice had said, "Amelia Hart?" He'd sat with her that day, asked how she'd been, listened without pity when she told him the truth. And when she mentioned she needed to get away before the baby came, he'd offered something outrageous. "Come with me to Paris. I have meetings, but I could use the company. My jet leaves Friday." At the time, she'd laughed. Now she was boarding the plane. The interior smelled faintly of leather and coffee. Adrian was already there, leaning back in one of the cream-colored seats, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His dark hair was neatly combed, though a single lock had fallen out of place. "You made it," he said, standing to take her coat. His voice carried warmth, no trace of the judgment she feared from others. "I said I would," she replied, managing a small smile. He studied her face for a beat longer than necessary, as if checking for cracks. Then he gestured toward the seat across from him. "Paris is better when you're not alone. Trust me." As the jet rose over the gray London skyline, Amelia found herself watching the clouds drift past. She told herself she was here for distraction, for space to breathe before the baby arrived. But there was something in the way Adrian's gaze softened when she spoke, something in the way he didn't flinch at the sight of her swollen belly, that made her wonder if this trip might be more than just an escape. When turbulence jolted the plane, his hand steadied hers. Just for a moment. But it was enough for her to feel the first shift, small, fragile, dangerous, in the wall she had built around herself. The city greeted them with a silver drizzle that turned the streets into mirrors. From the back seat of the black town car, Amelia watched Paris glide past. The wet cobblestones, the cafe awnings dripping with rain, the flash of bicycle wheels cutting through puddles. She had always imagined seeing the city for the first time with Daniel, hand in hand, their laughter mingling with the hum of Parisian streets. Instead, she was here with a man she barely knew, and somehow it felt safer. Adrian glanced at her, his profile sharp against the blurred window. "Not quite the postcard weather," he said lightly. She smiled faintly. "I've never minded the rain. It makes things softer." Their driver pulled up to a pale stone building draped in ivy, the kind of hotel you only saw in magazines. Inside, the air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood. The receptionist greeted Adrian like an old friend, sliding across 2 brass keys. Amelia tried not to stare at the way people seemed to look at him, not just with recognition but with a kind of quiet respect. Her room overlooked the Seine, the river shifting under the gray sky. She stood at the window for a long time, listening to the rain against the glass, the muffled sound of traffic below. The bed behind her looked impossibly soft, a far cry from the half-made one in her London flat. But rest wouldn't come yet. That evening, Adrian knocked on her door. He wasn't in a suit anymore, just dark trousers and a gray sweater that made him look younger, almost approachable. "Dinner?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't exactly fit into Paris fashion right now." He gave her a look that was both gentle and unwavering. "You fit in anywhere. Come on." The restaurant was tucked into a narrow street, candlelit tables pressed close together. The warm scent of butter and garlic drifted through the air. Amelia felt self-conscious at first, aware of her growing belly in the small space, but Adrian spoke to her as though nothing about her had changed. They talked about small things, the food, the rain, the view from their rooms, and then, without warning, he asked, "Do you want to talk about him?" Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Not really," she said after a moment. He nodded, not pushing. "Fair enough." But later, walking back under the drizzle, she found herself telling him anyway, about the months she'd tried to hold the marriage together, the way Daniel had grown more distant with every scanned photo she showed him, about the night she'd realized he wasn't coming home to her anymore. She didn't look at Adrian while she spoke, but she could feel his attention, steady and unflinching. By the time they reached the hotel, the rain had soaked through her hair. He reached out, gently tucking a damp strand behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a second too long, and when he stepped back, something unspoken hung between them. Not heavy, not rushed, but real. That night, Amelia lay in the quiet, listening to the rain fade. For the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, turning the Seine into a ribbon of gold. Paris had shaken off the rain, and the air felt fresher, brighter. Amelia stood at the window in her robe, a mug of tea warming her hands, watching the city wake. She didn't hear Adrian knock until he spoke. "Are you up for a walk?" She turned. He was leaning casually against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled. There was an ease about him this morning, like he belonged to the light just as much as the night. They wandered through winding streets lined with flower stalls and bakeries. The smell of warm bread drifted from open doors. Adrian bought 2 croissants, handing one to her without asking. "Best eaten while still hot," he said, breaking his in half. It had been a long time since someone had done something so small, so uncalculated. For her. She took a bite, the buttery layers melting instantly, and for the first time in weeks, she laughed. A soft, startled sound that seemed to surprise them both. "See," Adrian said, his eyes crinkling. "You do remember how." "How what?" she asked. "How to smile." She rolled her eyes, but she couldn't quite erase it from her face. They stopped at a tiny park with green benches and blooming lilacs. Amelia sat, resting her hand over her stomach. Adrian watched her for a moment before asking, "Do you know what you're having?" "A girl," she said quietly. "I think I've known since the start." "Have you chosen a name?" She hesitated. "I had one, but now, I'm not sure it fits anymore." He didn't push, just nodded, letting the silence settle between them like a shared blanket. That afternoon, they visited a small gallery tucked behind a cobblestone street. The paintings were all of the same woman, in different seasons at different ages. Amelia stood in front of one where the woman was smiling under a summer sun, her eyes full of something that felt almost familiar. "What do you see?" Adrian asked from beside her. "Myself. Or maybe who I was before," she said before she could stop herself. He looked at the painting, then at her. "I think she's still there." For a moment, she couldn't look away from him. The world outside the frame of that moment, the other visitors, the murmur of footsteps, blurred. She had the sudden, dizzy thought that if he reached for her hand right then, she might not let go. Back at the hotel that evening, she found herself standing outside his door without quite knowing why. But before she could knock, she heard him on the phone, speaking low in French. She caught only fragments: business, contracts, delays. His voice was calm, but there was an edge there she hadn't heard before. She stepped back, quietly returning to her room. Something in her chest tightened. Adrian Blackwell was still a stranger in many ways. Kind stranger, yes, but still a man with a world she didn't fully understand, and maybe never would. As she lay in bed, the memory of his eyes in the gallery stayed with her. Warm, searching, dangerous in the way they made her want to believe again. 2 days later, Paris felt different. The city had started to seep into Amelia's skin. The morning cafes with steam curling from coffee cups, the soft hum of street musicians along the river, the way the light lingered on stone walls at dusk. She was beginning to breathe more easily, to forget, for moments at a time, the ache that had followed her from London. Adrian had been the same, steady, quietly attentive. He never hovered, never pushed, but always seemed to appear when she needed him. That morning, he had a meeting and suggested she explore alone. "There's a market near Rue Claire," he'd said. "You'll love it." The market was alive with color, baskets of strawberries, strings of garlic, flowers wrapped in brown paper. She wandered slowly, touching fabrics, inhaling the warm scent of fresh bread. She was comparing jars of honey when she heard her name. "Amelia!" She turned, and for a heartbeat, she thought she'd imagined it. But there, standing by a stall of apricots, was Daniel. Her chest tightened. He looked exactly the same, the easy smile, the sharp blue eyes, but now it felt rehearsed. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice clipped. "I could ask you the same," he said. His gaze flicked to her stomach. "So, it's true." "Yes, and it's none of your business." His smirk faltered. "I just wanted to see you. I've been thinking." The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Adrian appeared at her side, his presence filling the space like a protective wall. "Is everything all right?" His eyes shifted briefly to Daniel, assessing cool. "We were just leaving," Amelia said, her voice firmer than she felt. Daniel opened his mouth, but Adrian's gaze didn't waver. The silence stretched, and finally, Daniel stepped back. "Take care, Amelia," he said, before disappearing into the crowd. They walked without speaking until they reached a quieter street. Adrian glanced at her. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." She kept her eyes forward. I wasn't ready to see him." "I could tell," Adrian said softly. "But you handled it." She almost told him she hadn't. That inside, she was shaking. But instead, she asked, "Did you cut your meeting short?" "I did." "Why?" His eyes met hers. "Because you looked like you needed me more than they did." Something shifted then. Not the slow, tentative change she'd felt before, but a deeper crack in the glass walls she had built. She was afraid of what might pour through. That evening, she sat across from him in the hotel lounge. A fire crackled in the grate, casting a warm glow over the deep leather chairs. She found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone, about the loneliness of the last year, about how she'd stopped recognizing her own reflection. Adrian listened without interruption. When she fell quiet, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You deserve more than what you've been given, Amelia, and you'll have it. You just have to let yourself believe it." Her throat tightened. She didn't know if he was talking about love, life, or both. and she didn't know which scared her more. The next day was their last in Paris. The morning light poured through the hotel lobby as Amelia waited for Adrian, her coat folded over her arm. They had planned to spend the day walking the quieter districts, avoiding the tourist crush. But when the lift doors opened, Adrian stepped out with a look she hadn't seen before. Guarded, almost hesitant. "Change of plans," he said. "I need to tell you something before we go anywhere." They sat in the small lounge by the window, the hum of conversation around them fading to a low murmur. Adrian took a breath. "The meeting I cut short yesterday, it wasn't just business. Daniel was there." Amelia blinked. "Here? In Paris?" "He was trying to sell a project to one of my partners. He didn't know I was involved until I walked in. He mentioned you, and he wasn't kind." Her stomach twisted. "What did he say?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "That you were using this trip to make him jealous. That you'd never survive without him. That the baby would be better off without you." Amelia's chest felt hot, her breath shallow. "And you believed him?" "Not for a second," Adrian said, his voice steady. "But I wanted you to know because he's not going to just disappear. He's already watching. And He stopped, searching her face. "I care about what happens to you. More than I should, maybe." The words landed between them like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward. Amelia's heart thudded in her ears. "Why more than you should?" she asked quietly. "Because I told myself this trip was about giving you space. A break. Not about wanting more. But I do, Amelia. I want more." Her pulse quickened. "And what if I can't give you more right now? What if I'm still broken?" He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Then I'll take whatever you can give. Even if it's just this mornings in Paris, walks in the rain, you laughing over a croissant. It's enough. For now." Something inside her loosened, the tight knot she'd been carrying for months. She didn't know if it was the sincerity in his eyes or the quiet way he said "for now," but she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. That night, they went to dinner at a quiet bistro near the river. After dessert, Adrian suggested they walk back to the hotel. The streets were hushed, the lamps casting pools of golden light on the wet pavement. At the Pont Neuf he stopped. The Seine glimmered beneath them, carrying the reflection of the city lights. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I don't want this to end when we go back to London," he said. "It doesn't have to," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. His hand brushed hers, slow, deliberate. She didn't pull away, and when his fingers finally closed around hers, it felt less like a beginning and more like something she'd been moving toward for a very long time. The return flight to London felt different. The city was the same gray sprawl it had been when they left, but Amelia wasn't. Paris had given her something she didn't realize she'd been missing. Not just joy, but a quiet kind of strength. The kind that made you sit a little straighter, breathe a little deeper. Adrian sat across from her on the jet, reading over some papers, but every now and then she caught him looking at her, like he was making sure she was still there, still real. She found herself wondering if anyone had ever looked at her that way before. They landed in the late afternoon. Amelia expected to feel the weight of London settle back over her shoulders, but as they stepped out into the cool air, she felt steady. Until she saw him. Daniel was leaning against a sleek black car at the edge of the drop-off area. His eyes locked on her immediately, his mouth curling into that same half-smile she used to mistake for charm. "Amelia," he said as they approached. "We should talk." "There's nothing to talk about," she replied, keeping her voice even. His gaze shifted to Adrian. "You think this holiday fling is going to last?" Adrian didn't flinch. "That's not your concern." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake. Both of you." Amelia stepped closer, her pulse steady. "The only mistake I made was thinking you were the kind of man I could trust. But now I know better. And for the record, Daniel, I'm not surviving without you. I'm living without you." His eyes narrowed, but she didn't wait for an answer. She turned toward Adrian, who was watching her with something like quiet pride. The weeks that followed were slow, steady. Adrian didn't rush her. Some days they met for coffee, others for long walks in Hyde Park. He learned the way she took her tea, the exact curve of her smile when she felt safe. She learned that behind his business armor was a man who noticed everything: the tilt of her shoulders when she was tired, the way she touched her stomach when she was thinking. One evening, she invited him over. The flat was still half unpacked, but she'd made pasta and lit 2 candles on the small kitchen table. After dinner, they sat on the sofa, her head resting against his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "I thought love was supposed to be loud, grand gestures, big declarations. But with you, it's quieter. And I think I like that more." Adrian's arm tightened around her. "Love isn't about how loud it is, Amelia. It's about how certain it feels." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words settle over her. When their daughter was born 3 months later, Adrian was there. Not just in the delivery room, but for every midnight feeding, every first smile. He didn't replace what she'd lost. He built something new with her, piece by piece. And sometimes, when they walked through the city together, her hand in his, their little girl bundled against her chest, Amelia thought back to that day in Heathrow. The day she'd boarded a plane to Paris, thinking she was just running away. It turned out she was flying straight toward the life she'd been waiting for.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.